have Thomas Kellein here this evening to present the second Distinguished Lecture Series taught this semester. His presentation is entitled Hiroshi Sugimoto, A Lot of Water in the Desert. Thomas was born in Nuremberg, Germany, and received his doctorate from the University of Hamburg in 1982. He is internationally renowned as a specialist in minimal and conceptual art, European modernism, and contemporary art practices, which has generated many outstanding curatorial projects organized by him over the last 25 years, both in Europe and in the United States. In January of 2001, he was appointed director of the Tsunade Foundation in Marfa, Texas, which was established by the late American artist Donald Judd. Dr. Kellein is not only a leading authority on the art of Donald Judd, having first worked with him on a proposed architectural project in Switzerland in 1990, but he's also an innovative administrator, having served 14 years as director of the Kunsthalle Bielefeld in Bielefeld, Germany, and prior to that as the director of the Kunsthalle Basel in Switzerland from 1988 to 1995. While at Bielefeld, Thomas organized groundbreaking exhibitions on the work of Casimir Malevich, Henri Laurence, Adam Fuss, Louise Bourgeois, Jeff Koons, and Yoko Ono. And at the Kunsthalle Basel, he curated important exhibitions about Mark Rothko, Clifford Still, Andy Warhol, the Fluxus Group, and Hiroshi Sugimoto. Of his notable writings on Sugimoto, Thomas Kellein has authored or contributed insightful essays to 4 outstanding publications, beginning with in 1995 with Hiroshi Sugimoto Time Exposed, which was the first extended critical analysis and personal interview with the artist about the dioramas, theaters, and Seascape series, including as well the Guggenheim Museum's exhibition catalog Hiroshi Sugimoto Portraits from 2000, Hiroshi Sugimoto Architecture of Time from 2002, and simply Sugimoto from 2005, written on the occasion of the photographer's tour de force installation at the Fondation Cartier pour l'Art Contemporain in Paris. The exhibition here, Hiroshi Sugimoto, is the first focused exhibition of the artist's work in the state of New Mexico, and it's been made possible due to the generous cooperation of the Frankel Gallery in San Francisco in accord with Hiroshi Sugimoto, who granted museum director Lillian McKinnon access to 5 of the artist's most celebrated campaigns, represented in 10 photographs on view in the Van Der Koop Gallery. The UNM Art Museum wishes to extend its gratitude to the Frankel Gallery, San Francisco, and to Hiroshi Sugimoto, who generously cooperated with Museum Director Lillian McKinnon for the realization of the exhibition. We are also grateful to the support of Dr. Kirsten Buick, Chair of the Department of Art and Art History, who ensured co-sponsorship of the Distinguished Lecture Series, and to the museum's fund endowment. And now, without further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Thomas Kellein.
Better. Oh, thank you so much, then, and thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me, Lorraine McKinnon and Michelle, and thank you also for this nice introduction. No introduction without a tiny mistake. So Marfa, Texas started not in 2001, but in 2011. So I just spent my first year there.
I just read it.
It's fine, no problem. And maybe this is the reason why I was invited. The first exhibition at the Tsunade Foundation, founded by Donald Judd in 1986, 25 years ago, is Sugimoto's Pagodas, an exhibition that opened last year in October and that will run through the end of July should you like to come. It is a series of 24 of his new pagodas that I will show pretty much at the end of this lecture. So let me give a little introduction. I understand this is a university, so you have seen the exhibition, you have read all these books on Sugimoto, quite obviously. You probably Googled him, and if he would be here, you would already laugh after a couple of sentences, because Sugimoto is a man of great wit, of great irony, of great satire. He's one of the greatest title givers I've ever met. I just visited him at his studio last week in New York, and I only stepped into the door. He showed me a new series of work and said one of these nice puns or remarks or titles, as I call them, which is anachronism has been always my policy. another thing came a couple of minutes later, which was before and after life. This is what you see here, before and after life. So when you have never seen a diorama photograph by Sugimoto, you would, I mean, today we are not wondering about anything, but if you are forced to wonder, then you ask yourself, how was the photographer able to come that close? It's about maybe 5 to 10 yards away from the iceberg. The dioramas, this is an idea Sugimoto had while he was almost daydreaming, or let's better say sleeping, walking along the vitrines of the Museum of Natural History in New York, vitrines that have been created during the Great Depression. So stuffed animals on a real stage, on a kind of stage prop, but with painted backgrounds, three-dimensional and in color. The idea to photograph these works in black and white is obviously a wonderful trick to make all of a sudden this illusion that every child studying with a class and with a teacher at this museum would immediately recognize it is not an ice bear, it is not a seal, it's not a real landscape. However, in the black and white photograph, the illusion is so strong that we all of a sudden think of a snapshot. The same happens to this wonderfully arranged group of gemsboks that you can see here in the exhibition. My first introduction to Sugimoto, or self-introduction, was that I wanted to invite him to an exhibition called the 21st Century that I organized in 1992. It was a little bit earlier, I can say. It was a group exhibition with contemporary artists that I thought at that time would be guiding us into the 21st century, and this picture was on the cover. To me, it meant welcome to the 21st century. So these guys are very much, I think, speaking. Nature is on stage to be looked at as if it were the acting force, and still, as Sugimoto says, before and after life, so it's entirely dead. He likes this, and still it looks extremely lively. So he wants to be the artist, always staying a little bit outside, being aloof, being also a little bit elusive. If you read through his publications, at least what I was having as a conversation with him, every year he tells you a little bit more about his biography, about his history, about his interests. So now we know at least a little bit. In the very beginning, when I met him in 92, 93, very often, he didn't talk that much. He also was never really silent. Let me give you a very brief background of his photographic ideas and also his biography. Born in 1948, 3 years after the end of the war, in a totally destroyed Japan. The father is a wonderful storyteller, narrator of the No theater, the eldest Japanese form of puppet theater. The mother, however, gives the son a Christian education. So Sugimoto goes to a Christian college in Tokyo and is educated to become a Marxist. In 1968 he enters college. He basically doesn't learn that much, which I can say also for myself. We had these wonderful posters in Germany. The railroad was always advertising in Germany with the slogan, "Everybody talks about the weather, we don't," because the German railroad thinks they drive whatever the weather is. And the students changed that and took Marx, Engels and Lenin on a red background, and also used the slogan, "Everybody talks about the weather, we don't." So Sugimoto finished college in Tokyo in 1972 without a diploma. He didn't have any kind of tests, any kind of exams. He just got the diploma sent to his house, and this was it. Because the university was closed, it was on strike, everybody went on strike. So what he did was, he wanted to really know and experience socialism. He entered the Trans-Siberian railroad in Vladivostok, and he was riding all the way west to Moscow and from there to Prague in then Czechoslovakia. And this like week or 2 weeks railroad ride was enough to teach him that Marxism and the existing socialism is not really what he wanted. So he took another course. He went to San Francisco. All of a sudden he had people around himself who were well educated in Zen. They have read Alan Watts, for instance, and they also were on drugs. So Sugimoto all of a sudden turned from the Christian Marxist, so to say, to kind of a Zen drug hippie person, which he doesn't like to be mentioned too often. He became a commercial photographer in his early time, which was 74. However, after 2 years, he thought this is not what he wanted to become. So he moved over to New York. He married. He opened a gallery for Japanese antiques. Obviously, the mother, the father gave him the kind of platform for that. He is, in fact, one of the best connoisseurs of Japanese antiques that I know, and he has sold his works. Not his works, excuse me, the items, the collectibles from his New York gallery to the major American museums collecting Asian art. This is, by the way, how he had his first museum shows in the United States. It mostly came through the back door, which were the Japanese or Asian art departments. They knew of Sugimoto's photographs earlier than most of the other contemporary art museums. I'm showing this picture here because it's the second idea. After walking through the Museum of Natural History and giving a strange kind of life to these museum vitrines, he had an even more kind of radical and I would even say cruel idea. You probably all watched Sunday night the Academy Awards. Of course I didn't because I had to prepare myself for this lecture. Whatever the movie would be, whether The Descendants or The Iron Lady, Sugimoto would put his camera in an afternoon time or in even a midday time with the permission of the theater owner into the theater, and the shutter would be open for the entire length of the film. Bad for the film, good for Sugimoto. Every film in the history of film will be always a white triangle. This is it. And he started with the old-fashioned theaters in New York. Here you see the Trilon. It's a small movie theater shot in 1977. Then you see Radio City Music Hall, which is a wonderful Art Deco movie house he shot in 1978. And here you see the Plaza, another image from 1978. And I can jump into another decade. And he did principally the same thing with the drive-in theaters, which are not very fashionable anymore. However, they were. You know, every loving couple started the relationship in the drive-in theater. And it was entirely dark. This kind of, again, cruel Sugimoto gives us almost too much light here. However, there are no cars, there are no loving couples, there's basically, as usual, no comment. You wonder why all these horrible scratches are on the photograph. Is he unable to keep his camera clean, or is he using bad paper, or have collectors even made these marks, or he himself? No, this is the airplanes landing and starting in Los Angeles airport, why the shutter is wide open during the screening of the film. And here you have, as usual, I must confess I've never been in a drive-in myself in my entire life, but there's a little exhibition gallery in Marfa called the Ballroom, and they want to have a drive-in in Marfa very soon, so you should come to Marfa, and maybe Sugimoto shoots his last drive-in photography one day in Marfa, Texas. But at least you get the speaker into the window of your car, and then you can move the window up again, and the film starts. However, in Sugimoto's case, it's always blank white canvas. Excuse me. The first photograph you saw was the a Union City drive-in. This is the studio drive-in in Culver City, also a photograph from 1993. And now you see the South Bay drive-in 1993 in San Diego. And I move to the third group, which is a little bit guiding us to the title, Why So Much Water in the Desert? Sugimoto decidedly started with 3 groups of work his entire career. He did not want to be an artist, he did not want to be a photographer, he also didn't want to be just a dealer. He was more, from his point of view, starting as a conceptual artist. He had 3 basic ideas how to approach art with the medium of photography, all of them dating before 1980. And even this one, this is the earliest seascape. It's Caribbean Sea, Jamaica, shot in 1980. It's the second seascape he ever took. I don't know what the first is. I think it's a failed image of the same seascape. He went to the actual seascape, so he traveled to a place. In the same way, he went to the theater to shoot the entire movie. He wanted to basically portray, in the end of the day, the theater. In this case, you cannot say he wanted to portray really the sea shore. You don't see boats, you don't see landscapes, you don't see people swimming, you don't see fish, you don't see birds. So what is this about? He travels to all these places with seascapes, and then he shoots just the water and the sky, and he, with his 19th century camera, he's extremely eager to have the horizon exactly in the center of the negative. And this goes on and on. So after Caribbean Sea, Jamaica, this I have to see, excuse me, yeah. I show you a seascape from the Irish Sea, the Isle of Man, shot at the Isle of Man, and this is from 1990. The first one was very crisp. You could almost, seemingly touch these little waves you found in the water. The second one is foggy, Isle of Man, Ireland, England, a lot of rain, almost never clear sky. Well, this could be anywhere, again. However, he decidedly went there, and he took himself always a number of days. He shot always a number of pictures. What is the idea of these seascapes? This is a little bit more a difficult question. I think the dioramas and the theaters follow a very, very clear and precise concept that is immediately stunning, because it's a sort of an arrogance, it's a sort of a blow against the film industry, against movie lovers, against actors, whoever is involved in the production of a film. If you look at one of his theaters, and same with the dioramas, it's maybe an homage to the work progress administration from 29 to 33, 34, 35, when these vitrines have been created. But what is the philosophy of these seascapes? Let me show another one. This is the Ionian Sea in Santa Cesarea, also 1990. This is the Marmara Sea in Silvili. This is, I skipped one here. See, I should know them all. This is the Bodensee in Utwil. So this is almost where I come from, southern Germany, the mildest area of Germany. It's like a never-ending spring there, even in December, seemingly. And here you find Lake Superior, Cascade River. And this is a very spectacular photograph already after 2000. This is near Sugimoto's. He has a studio in Tokyo. He also now has a studio in Kamakura. So at the seashore, it's a train hour away from Tokyo. He has been really studying that sea after the year 2000 and again and again. In the meantime, he has shot the sea during the night, which creates the night seascapes that I could show during a sort of Tsukimoto retrospective, the first one that ever took place in 1995 at Kunsthalle Basel. And here it's obviously a sunset, a very, very dramatic sunset without having the sun in the picture. That is totally fascinating to Sugimoto. And I show you one last seascape. This is Lake Superior, Eagle River. So it seems as if I start to explain the philosophy of the seascape, but well, I don't want you to get the solution too soon, so I come to something else. This is, as you know, Napoleon Bonaparte, however, shot in 1999. And again, it's a stunning image. It's very clear, it's very crisp. At that time, Tsugimoto has enlarged the size of his prints. The small prints you have here, the flight up, is something you would love to have in your bedroom as a student or as a professor, maybe as the only image in the room, next to your single bed, of course, and not a double bed, I hope, next to your writing desk and next to your chair and whatever, whether MacBook or any other tool to work with. However, this is an almost splendid format. I unfortunately cannot say it by heart in inches, but it's approximately, instead of 20 inches high and 30 inches wide, including the frame, this is about 60, 70 inches high. All these pictures were shot in 1999 at Madame Tussauds. So again, you have an old, even much older than the Museum of Natural History, you have an old tradition of creating illusion. Madame Tussauds is hundreds of years old. It was kind of founded instead of grave sculpture, instead of portraits, to memorize VIPs in Great Britain, especially the king's family. And it became more and more important as a tourist attraction after the Second World War. So it was something kind of very, very normal that a famous politician, a famous historical figure, a ruler, or Fidel Castro, let's say the world's famous living and eldest communist, that these people were to be found at Madame Tussauds. The same he did with other wax museums. And here you find Emperor Hiroto, a print that he, for a funny reason, made in a smaller size and also only in an edition of 1. The small photographs that you have in the exhibition here are edition of 25. When Tsukimoto started selling them, the print numbers 1 to 15 were very affordable, $2,500. Those who were latecomers, print 16 to 20 were $3,500, and 21 to 25, those who needed some punishment, were $4,500. Due to all the resales, these prices, of course, no longer apply, but they applied throughout the 90s, for instance. This was like an $18,000 print. When it has been produced today, please don't ask me. And the large ones are much, much more expensive. A seascape today is sold for a large seascape. He also enlarges his previous work, is sold for $400,000, and in the auction houses it can be more. The stunning thing is that the emperor is almost sitting for you. He's becoming so close that how often you walk into Madame Tussauds and you will be always surrounded by hundreds, if not thousands of people. I don't know whether you ever were there. I really cannot recommend it. The queues outside are so incredibly long, and the noise of all the children and all the tourists who want to desperately see these figures, although it's just wax figures, it's really a big thing to go there, because you're totally, in the end, you're totally tired by just all these visitors. It's an incredible success machine. And all of a sudden, Sugimoto turns this into the most pleasant kind of, affair you can have with the Princess of Wales. A a lot of the work Sugimoto did was done during the night hours, which meant he had to write to the institutions, he had to ask for permission, he had to get special treatment through guards. So he needed to convince everybody about his work throughout the years, and Madame Tasso obviously allowed him to do it. Some people tried to charge. He did one series of Buddhist sculptures in Kyoto, Sancho Sangendo. This is the hall of 100 bays with 1,000 Buddhas. The Japanese are very good business people, maybe I would say at least as good as the Americans. And these monks, they wanted to charge him, and they said, because it is 1,000 Buddhas, why don't you pay $1,000 for each one to shoot them? At the time Sugimoto was doing that work, it would have been entirely impossible to pay $100,000 just as a production fee, because already putting up the camera and doing this work throughout several weeks' time was a very, very expensive maneuver. Okay, I'm supposed to talk for another 15 minutes only, and I want to come back to the desert, to the water, to the seascapes. Let me talk a moment about the pagoda. We all know what a pagoda is. It's a 5-element, and then you stop already. What is it? Is it architecture? Is it sculpture? In Christianity, we all know that throughout centuries, it was a big thing to find the grave of Jesus Christ. All the crusades were made, officially at least, to find the grave of Jesus. The pagoda reportedly is the grave, is the place, is the container where the ashes of Buddha is to be found. This is an idea that comes with Buddhism from India, however, without the idea of this kind of a structure. Then Buddhism moved slowly into China. There the idea of a pagoda as a 5-part structure has been created. At the bottom you have the earth. The ball, the circle, the sphere, this is water. The triangle, this is the sky. On top of the sky is fire, and on the very top there's an element that we miss in Christianity. This is emptiness. So Sugimoto started an entire new series, although he is kind of reusing the seascapes. How is this made? First of all, the glass you see, all these works have been created in 2011, and the series is still not finished. We are the only place so far showing that work. There has been a brief show during a couple of weeks in Japan, and also during a couple of weeks at the Pace Gallery in New York. And the idea of the series is to create 100 pagodas. If you buy them, they come in a box. So they are like the ashes of Buddha in a little box, meaning a seascape, an individual, only one edition, singular edition seascape of Sugimoto in a box. And he is repeating the best images. And I now show you only pagodas with seascapes that you have been seen previously. I hope you will identify all of them. But so this is, see, I have to look it up myself. I'm the expert, but still I don't know anything. In any case, I hope you realize that this is again the Irish Sea at the Isle of Man. Why is it not moving? Is this another one? Yes. Oh, see? I'm sorry. Oh. So this was the Irish Sea, and this is a fairly clear one. This is the Marmara Sea in Silvili again. This is the Lake Superior, Cascade River. They're all different, huh? And let me stop here because you immediately recognize what that is. This is the Bay of Sagami in Atami near Kamakura. This is this wonderful kind of a sunset. So I promised you to talk a little bit about the sea and a little bit also about the pagoda. The pagoda, as I said, has been conceived as an idea during the early decades of Chinese Buddhism. Buddhism has been entering Japan in the 7th century. You see the earliest Buddhist sculpture in Japan in the 8th century. It is, of course, the Buddha himself, Buddha as a child, but it is also the idea of a portrait of a Zen monk who tries to become Buddha by starving himself to death and not drinking anything in order that he becomes himself an entirely dry sculpture, in order to make the flesh become kind of wood, which of course didn't work. But still, all these monks starved themselves to death when they knew they would die, and then a kind of a life portrait has been carved after them. One of my funny ideas with Sugimoto was that I show these Buddha sculptures, the priests from the 8th century into, well, even the 20th century. It's a very, very old tradition of life-size Buddhist monks that are sitting in this lotus position, and you can see everything. I mean, they are not at all fat, and they look very wise, and they all have no hair, and you see the wrinkles of their cloth. And I went to several museums in Japan together with Sugimoto because I wanted to use him or really misuse him as my speaker. However, in Nara and in Kyoto, they said, well, Sherman Lee, who was the best expert in Japanese art at the Cleveland Museum, he had to come first 25 years to Japan in order to install his very first exhibition. So for me, 25 years of traveling to Japan to create one show was a little bit too much, a few months too much. To come back to the pagodas have been only realized in Japan. So it is a Japanese invention in two ways. Japanese architecture creates these layers of roofs on top of the fundaments that could hold Buddha's ashes. This is one way to create a pagoda. The other way is a real sculpture. And the sculptures that have these 5 elements, all of them have these 5 elements, have been created in stone in the 12th century and then in a clear glass crystal in the 13th century. And again, it runs like a lot of other traditions in Japanese Buddhist art throughout the centuries. So again, here, Sugimoto uses a shape that is entirely Japanese, that is entirely tradition, that has been used and used and used not only during one generation, but during many generations. I've seen a book, and I could briefly study a book, a 2-volume book just on pagodas as buildings and sculptures in Japan since the 12th century into, well, the late 19th and early 20th century. And what I could find is that the way Sugimoto works is still very different from what these historic pagodas show. It is the idea of the balance, and now I ask you to look more or less only at the glass, and I give you some of these other, although this is always the same angle, pictures here. He tries to make these elements more or less even. Historically, either the earth is very heavy, it's a pedestal, or the water is very bulky, it's like a big belly, or the emptiness is tiny, tiny, like the little dot, the so-called ice on the cake. The proportions are always different. Sugimoto tries to make it into something like an equilibrium. However, he wants to show his seascapes. So the sphere is, in a way, secretly the most important issue. The glass he uses is the glass for the lenses of the Nikon cameras. It's a specialist who cuts it, who polishes it, who seals the photographs into the sphere. And now he told me last week, the guy who has done all these pagodas, he cannot longer do this. He's too old and he's too sick, and now he doesn't even know whether he can ever finish this series. It is very expensive. It is a very long process to realize even one of these pagodas, edition of one. Let me frankly say that a lot of people find this work pretty boring. You also have to realize one of these pagodas is just this big. It's smaller than your hand. It's 15 centimeters high. This is about 6 inches. Why care about a 6-inch sculpture? You can care about it if you go again to the beginning of his art, an edition of 25. You keep it in your student's or teacher's room, and there's nothing else. There's your bed, there's your desk, there are your thoughts, there's an open window, there's no smoking, of course, and hopefully not too much drinking. So then, you have a lot of joy with these seascapes. And I show you the last two ones. This is again the Lake Superior, Eagle River. You remember this dark line above the water, and nobody really knows how is it getting there. And the last here, this is again the Bodensee in Utwil. This is now another point of view onto these pagodas. For Sugimoto, the seascape is nothing less than the earliest image of man, the earliest moment of, let's say, cultural consciousness. If you look at the seascape, the way he does it, it's this position like Caspar David Friedrich called his painting the monk at the sea. You are yourself with water and sky. You are in front of something that is not you, that is outside of you. If you look at Barnett Newman's famous "Here I Am," it's the expression of awaking self-consciousness in front of nature. Sugimoto thinks and believes that, again, generations of people, generations of cultures, generations and groups of different nations have always encountered this same idea of horizon, of the sky and of the sea as the major forces we have in nature. It's the same, it would be the same with the land and the sky, however then he would create all these different landscapes. So the seascape is not an irony, it's not a satire, it's not, kind of mimicking film and film industry. It's the attempt to create something that is almost visionary, that goes back deeply into the past and that could theoretically also go very far into the future. The shrinking of the actual factual image down into this little lens glass, as if you would have your eyeball in front of yourself, as if you would look, let's say, into your own Nikon camera, which is not a digital camera yet or no longer. That is, of course, an approach of the artist to make himself become a part of Japanese art history. So the older Sugimoto gets, the more seemingly he's longing to his beginnings as a Japanese antique dealer, as somebody who comes from Japan, of somebody who one day wants to be embedded in his own cultural background, go into the roots where he seemingly comes from, but could not go to directly because of Marxist studies at Tokyo University. Thank you very much.